accountability is what we need. Tyre Nichols' family attorney, Ben Crump, passionately declared those words as he announced a $550 million lawsuit against the city of Memphis, its police department, and the precise officers involved in that now disbanded Black Scorpion unit who allegedly contributed to Tyre's tragic demise, which was all, of course, caught on tape. It was back on January 7th there in Memphis that Nichols faced a horrifying encounter with police during what was supposed to be a routine traffic stop. He was brutally punched and kicked multiple times, ultimately leading to his death 3 days later at the hospital. In the aftermath of all of that, 5 Memphis cops were fired and charged with second-degree murder for their roles in the incident. Again, all of which was recorded on body cam and surveillance footage. Here's Tyre's mother as she spoke during a press conference yesterday.
$500 million. That's a lot of money. But just as the judge spoke, this has nothing to do with the monetary value of this lawsuit, but everything that has to do with accountability.
Amen.
Those 5 police officers murdered my son. They beat him to death. And they need to be held accountable along with everyone else that has something to do with my son's murder.
Joining us today is Ben Crump, the esteemed family attorney for the Nichols family. And of course, as you probably haven't heard and seen by now, Mr. Crump has been at the forefront of these kind of issues, fighting for justice and representing the families of a sadly long list of victims, including Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. His efforts have led to historic settlements and verdicts for families who have faced this kind of police violence across our country. Mr. Crump, always an honor to talk to you. Thanks for giving us some time this morning.
Thank you for having me, Rob.
The word that often gets used, of course, is accountability. Justice really isn't possible because nothing really brings back those we've lost, but at least there is some sense that people will be held accountable for what they they've done. What is the family's expectation from where this lawsuit will realistically go?
Well, you know, that is going to be up to the city leadership of Memphis. We understand clearly, Rob, that this is a landmark case, and that's why we filed this landmark $550 million lawsuit. It was very intentional. It wasn't a mistake. This is not just about getting justice for Tyre Nichols, but it's also about the conduct, the savage beating, taking his life out of his body when he was just saying, "What did I do? And I just want to go home." And it's the policies that were in place that they have these Black oppression units within the police department that say they have a license to terrorize Black and brown communities. Well, we're sending a message to them as well, those cities all over the country. This isn't unique just to Memphis, whether it's Chicago, New Orleans, Miami, Atlanta, with the Red Dog unit that was disbanded. If you don't change these policies and you have a Tyre Nichols in your city, then we're going to come to you next. We want to make it a financial impediment to kill Black people unjustly in America when you're wearing a gun and a badge.
And to be fair, in some cities, not all, to your point, we're seeing these units get disbanded. We're seeing the feds step in with various consent decrees and investigations. Louisville comes to mind. Let me ask you this. In this particular case, and they're all jarring in their own way, what I remember being struck by was that these were 5 Black cops beating this man in the street like an animal. And that's why that video is hard to watch for some folks, because there was no, unlike some cases, no real, or I should say officers of color. There was not the racial subtext like we have in Kansas City, which we'll get to in a second. I know you're working with that family as well. Can you talk a bit about that dynamic a little bit? Because that was very hard for some people to stomach in this case, that these officers of color could essentially beat one of their own to death right there in the street.
Rob, this case was very disturbing on many levels. But as I've said on many occasions, the determining factors of whether the police are going to levy excessive use of force and brutality doesn't depend on the race of the police officers. It depends on the race of the citizens. And that has been, detailed in many cases and many lawsuits, this propensity to trample on the constitutional right of people of color versus doing those outrageous, egregious things to white citizens. We don't see those videos, Rob. We keep saying, where are those videos? Why is it just black people and brown people being beat up like Tyre Nichols and George Floyd? And, that's where we are trying to send a message with this lawsuit that we're going to hold you accountable, and we're going to be intentional about holding you accountable because we want to make policy changes, wholesale changes, so we don't have to keep seeing these hashtags of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Tamir Rice, Tyre Nichols, Ivo Otieno, Andre Hill. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And we can do better, America. All we need to do is try to respect the dignity of all people.
Let me shift gears to Kansas City. We've seen these bizarre incidents in the country the last few days. Texas, upstate New York, and of course, Kansas City, where people have been shot or killed for just being in the wrong place. Just made a wrong turn, wrong driveway, wrong doorbell, wrong car. But this case in Kansas City, particularly disturbing. There is a racial component to it in the eyes of critics who look at this. I'm wondering what you make of the case in the idea legally for a second that in the views of that 84-year-old suspect, now the shooter in this case, he felt endangered. From what you know about the case, was there anything that young man did when he rang the doorbell at the wrong house that the shooter should have felt endangered in any way? And what does that family want? What does justice now look like to them since you're working with them as well?
Certainly. The family of Ralph Yard wants simple justice. They want accountability. The fact that you have this young black man be shot in his head and then shot towards his chest, and thank God his arm was blocking his chest, or we might have a different story today other than this miraculous story of his recovery. But it does not take away from the fact that this 84-year-old white citizen, for reasons that nobody can articulate, felt the need to shoot him through the glass door. Even though there were no words exchanged, he rang the doorbell. He was going to pick up his little twin brothers. And the fact that this gentleman who shot him said in the probable cause affidavit, and don't you ever come back around here again. We don't know what other things he said in the statements, but it was enough for the police detectives and the prosecutor to conclude that there were racial components involved in him shooting this young man point blank range twice. And so therefore, we want to make sure that people are not profiling our children just because the color of their skin. And I want to also say that we're equally outraged that the two young white women, one in upstate New York and one in Texas, who were killed just for driving their cars in the wrong spot. One was killed, one is in critical condition. But they were both shot too, inexplicably, because they simply made a mistake with the location they were trying to find, and yet these people shot them. This mentality of shoot first and ask questions later is something that we have to grapple with, America. Other than that, we have just innocent lives being taken on a daily basis.
As the Associated Press headline reads this morning, in 6 days, 4 young people in the U.S. were shot for making one of the most ordinary mistakes in everyday life, showing up at the wrong place. One more question on Kansas City. We know that the shooter lived alone. We know it was a largely white neighborhood. We know, politically speaking, it's a conservative neighborhood for however people choose to read those tea leaves or not. Do you think there is the basis here to elevate the charge to a hate crime? And will you advise to pursue that?
You know, the family wants full accountability, and they take the prosecutor at his word when he says this is the highest charge that they can get convictions on, and that he could face life in prison if convicted on those charges. Now, the federal government may look at it under different lens and decide it is a hate crime that was committed when this white citizen shot this young black 16-year-old child for simply pressing the doorbell. That is going to be a call that's made by the Federal Department of Justice, I believe. Either way, what we want is the message to be clear. You can't profile our children and kill them just because the color of their skin.
I know you're a busy man. We'll let you go. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump, representing the family of Tyre Nichols and also working with the family of that young 16-year-old man in Kansas City who was shot after ringing the wrong doorbell. Please come back, update us on both of these cases. Thank you so much for your time.
We will, Rob. Thank you for covering these important matters.
Absolutely. My honor. We'll be right back.